Recording. Okay, thank you everyone for coming today to our event. And this event is brought to you by DataTalks.Club, which is a community of people who love data. We have weekly events, and this is one of these events. We have events on Tuesday, which are more technical events with presentations. Next week, we will have an event about AWS Glue Data Brew, which is a new tool from AWS for data preparation. And we have a different kind of events on Friday, which are more like Q&A discussions, which we call live podcasts. And today we will talk about standing out as a data scientist in the recruitment process. And then next week, we'll also talk about mentoring. And during the talk today, you can ask anything you want, and we will use Slido for that. I now will share a link with you, and I'll just put it in chat. And after that, we can start. Okay, so the link is in chat. So during our conversation, if any question comes up to you, just put it there. And let me take my notes. And let's start. So last week, we talked about building data science teams and recruiting data scientists. But today, the topic is slightly different. So we'll talk about the recruitment process, but from the candidate's point of view. And we have a special guest today, Luke. So you probably know Luke as a podcast host. Usually you hear Luke asking questions, but today the situation is different. Luke takes the guest seat. And Luke is not only a podcast host, he is also a recruiter. He is a co-founder of Neural AI, which is a company that specializes in recruiting AI specialists, data scientists, machine learning engineers, and others. And today, Luke will share his experience with us and tell us how data scientists and other data professionals can stand out during the recruitment process. Hi, Luke, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for inviting me on the show, Alexi. This feels very weird being on the other side of the fence now.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Luke, let's start with your background. So can you tell us how you started your career, like how you got into AI and how it led to co-founding your own recruitment company?
Sure. Firstly, thanks for inviting me on the show, Alexi. But hi to everyone who's joined. So as Alexi said, my name's Luke. I'm the co-founder of Neural AI. I guess the history and the background is I've been recruiting in the data and analytics space for probably close to 10 years now. And historically, that started as, the kind of traditional BI and analytics space. And naturally, as things became more prevalent in the industry, like advanced analytics and data science and machine learning and deep learning, my career kind of transitioned with it, right? But I think like most people in recruitment, 99% of us all fell into it. And then most people fall out of love with it, but I've stuck it out for 10 years now. And to be honest, I think Neural come around from a couple of different perspectives, but one of those perspectives was I was just about to turn 30, and I had two choices that I could have made, right? So I could either continue working for businesses that I have to become a part of and embrace their values and embrace their processes and the way that they work, or I build something that kind of represents what I believe and what I feel about how recruitment should be done. So naturally, I went for the second option, and that led us to found Neural. But for me, I think the second perspective is as most of you are probably aware, there's a general kind of consensus about what the recruitment industry is, and I really wanted to create a business that kind of counterbalanced the bad reputation that a lot of recruitment consultants have. So, I wanted to create a business that is built on the foundation of providing value to the actual community that we recruit for, and try and live by something that is, make deposits into that industry, not just withdrawals. So, as Alexi said, I run a podcast. I'm looking into running AI events like similar to what this is. And ultimately, I wanted to create more of a community effort rather than, hey, we've got jobs, you've got candidates, or vice versa, you've got a CV, we've got some jobs. I think that's very, very old school and very transactional. For me, as I say, Neural was built on the back of wanting to create something different that is value and community driven rather than just, hey, do you want to work at a new business? So yeah, we started in early 2020, so probably not the best time to start a business in the midst of a global pandemic, but I think the value proposition that we've got and the specialism in data and artificial intelligence has really hit the mark. So yeah, that's a bit about me and a bit about my background. I hope that gives you a good snapshot.
Yeah, and indeed, like what you said about bad reputation of recruiters, I think everyone can agree to that sometimes they just come out of nowhere calling. But I can tell you that Luke is different, and this is really great at what you're doing, like all these podcasts and the plans for events. I think that is really awesome. It's not just a cold call out of nowhere, but actually like a community around that. That's really great, and thank you, Luke, for doing that.
Yeah.
But coming back to your main work as a recruiter, like I guess in data science, maybe I don't know if it's different from usual developer positions or maybe analysts, but I know that there are not so many good candidates, and yeah, so typically it's quite difficult to close positions, right? So
Sure.
what does it involve to close a position? What are typical steps? Like how you go around that?
Yeah. It is definitely more difficult than your average kind of development role because, you've probably experienced this as well. If you speak to 100 different people or 100 different businesses and say, oh, what is a data scientist? You're probably going to get 100 different answers. So I think one of the big challenges for us is every single position that we work on is quite different from the last, right? And every single business that we work with has a definition of what a machine learning engineer does or what a data scientist does or what X, Y, and Z does. So I think one of the big problems about, or the big challenges of the work that we do is that every single company is different, right? And that in itself is a challenge because you need to first understand the problems and the different challenges that those individual businesses are facing, and it's difficult to kind of group stuff together when everyone's got a different perspective on stuff, right? So I think, I can't remember the last time I worked in an easy position. I don't think there's such a thing in data science and AI community, especially at a senior level. But for me, I think our process breaks down into, like, to just give you a real quick bullet point of what we do, it breaks down into 6 key areas. So number one is role definition. So typically we'll work with businesses to help them define the actual positions within the business. And a lot of companies still struggle with that because it's still such a new, undefined market. So we help companies define the actual positions that they're looking for and offer guidance in terms of what's achievable and what's not. Secondly, we are heavily network focused in terms of the candidates that we typically provide. So as a business, we don't advertise. We kind of do a little bit, but that's not our main source of candidate attraction. So for us, the second point is we would market map the talent pools of people that they're potentially looking for, both from our network and from a headhunting perspective. So essentially, it'll be the people that we know and the people that we don't know. Thirdly, we would put together a long and short list. So a long list is essentially the people that we think could be okay for the role or has quite a lot of crossover. And then the short list is the people that we spoke to and we know that are right for that position. We then deliver the CVs and present them to the business. Following that, we would manage that process of recruitment. So that goes pretty much, you've got to think of us as like your interview buddy. That's probably a really bad way to describe it, but we manage the process from end to end, both from a client and candidate perspective. So interview preparation, feedback, we deliver that, we help you prepare, we highlight concerns or positives in the process. And, if there are problems or challenges, we tend to bring that to the table, and we try and overcome them with both candidate and client. And then lastly, when we get to that stage, we manage the closing of the process. So both from an offer negotiation perspective, but also from resignation and any kind of problems that come up in the process. So what I wouldn't say we are is we're not a traditional recruitment company whereby we do everything, and we do development, cloud, data, product. We don't do that. The clients will typically work with us on singular positions, or 2 or 3 positions, but they'll be on an exclusive basis, and we will be essentially an extension of that company that we're working with, and that means we run the process from full end to end.
Okay. And usually, how many candidates you speak with? What I'm trying to ask is how wide is the funnel? Like, how many people you have on this short list? How many people you talk to, you speak, or you get on the phone, and then to get just one, to just close one position?
Yeah. I think that it's so different from position to position, right? And because, as I say, we work on those kind of singular positions, some roles that we work on could be in the hundreds. There's a role that I'm working on at the moment where I'm doing a European-wide search, and I've long listed probably about 25 candidates across the whole of Europe. So it's really, really vast, from 10 to 20 candidates up to 200-300 candidates, depending on the type of position. What I would say though is, I mentioned this earlier, we don't actively advertise. Like, that's not our key. We don't say, right, we advertise lots of positions and stuff. So we don't deal with probably the volume of candidates that, say, you guys in OLX would, right? Like, to give you an example, one of my clients in Munich, for one position for an AI engineer, they received, I think it was like 1,300 CVs. We would never look at that amount of CVs ever. Yeah. So we're not volume, but I'd say on average, we probably look between 10 and 20 CVs a day, something like that. And that's across like all positions that we're working on.
Well, 10, 20 CVs per day is still quite a few CVs to look at. Of course, it's not the volume that we have to deal with, like our recruiters have to deal with, but it's still quite a lot of CVs that you need to look at every day. And in
you've got to think, everyone that we work with, I'd say probably 90-95% of the people that we work with, we are approaching. So it might not necessarily just be a CV, but it might be setting up conversations with people on LinkedIn and stuff like that. So I'd say profiles in general are probably be between 10 and 20. But that might be going through somebody's LinkedIn or an actual profile or X, Y, Z.
Okay. And what in these in these 10, 20 profiles, what does usually get your attention? Like, what do you look at typically? Like, when you say, okay, I really have to call this candidate, when you know that, okay, this candidate is really good, versus, okay, I'm not sure, maybe I'll talk to this person later when I first deal with these candidates. Like, what is it?
So I think, so when we spoke about this before, I tried to look back at some of the old CVs that I've been like, yes, they look amazing. And I'll try and substantiate all of these points so it kind of makes it really easily understandable. But I think if I start from the kind of first opening of a CV, and again, just as a disclaimer for anyone who's listening right now, this is just one person's view, and it's, again, very subjective, right? But I'm a bit of a sucker for good design from an artistic perspective, because I think that is something that your reader will see before they start reading your CV. So, you know, I try and live by something, which is your interview starts as soon as they open your CV. And before they start reading your CV, the first thing that they see is how well you've designed your CV actually is, right? So I always comment when I can clearly see that someone has taken the time to format and design their CV in a way that is really attractive. Not to say that that is the be all and end all, but I think, you know, this is kind of the representation of you, right? So if I open a CV and it looks great, I'm instantly interested about what's on the CV. Whereas if I open the CV and think, that looks pretty awful, it kind of sets a negative tone before someone's even started reading. So from my perspective, I think design is a really big part of that. But if we're talking about content specifically, for me, it breaks down into 3 key areas that I instantly look for and try and tick boxes in my own head. So again, you know, this is a disclaimer, but, you know, businesses pay us to find specific people. So we're probably a lot more critical on the profiles that we're looking at. And I think there's definitely a difference between being an internal talent acquisition, the headhunter. But look, the 3 things that are there. So number 1 is I'll instantly look for the crossover between the business and the role that they're applying for with the company that they're currently working in. Now, the reason that I say that is not because it's a name game, or it's not because it's all about the business that you work for, but it's primarily to do with the industry challenges that that business is facing and how well will you be able to actually understand those industry challenges. So, for example, if you're I don't know, a data scientist at Audi and you're applying for a data science position at BMW, you're instantly recognized more because you should understand the industry that you're working in, and the conversation that you can have internally with the business that you're applying for will be a lot higher than someone who doesn't understand that industry. So again, this is not a name game, but it definitely does add value to your CV when I say, right, I'm looking for someone for, I don't know, BMW or Zalando or Adidas or an autonomous driving startup. And the first thing that I see is that you're working in a very, very similar business. So that's point 1. Point number 2 is, and this is kind of, I do this in conjunction, right? Because it's not just all about that business. It's mainly to do with the use cases and the actual projects that you're working on right now. So, you know, I tend to test, or I tend to look for how close or how far you are away from the actual use cases and problems that you're going to be working on. Because again, you know, the clients that we'll typically work with, they come to us with specific roles working on specific things. So my first thing is, okay, cool. How close are you from a business perspective? Secondly, how close are you from a use case perspective? And like, how much crossover is actually there across those 2 things? Because if those 2 things aren't there, it's actually really difficult. You know, maybe other headhunters have got a different spin on this, but you know, for me, I think that culturally you could be great from an alignment perspective, and you probably could be good for that business. But, you know, from a headhunting perspective, so if we were working together right now, Alexi, and you said to me, hey, I need this, and this, and the profile that I gave to you in response to that didn't have any of that, but I said, but you'll really like this person and culturally they'll fit in, your feedback would be, that's not what we're looking for. So again, those are the first 2 things. But then lastly, I do look for that kind of cultural and industry alignment. So this isn't typically like the business per se, but it's kind of like the type of business that you're working for. So if you're working for a huge global financial services business and you're applying for a 10-man startup company, there are going to be some huge different cultural differences between those 2 businesses, right? And that for me, I'm like, are they going to get that industry? And vice versa, right? If you've had a startup career, are you going to get working in a big financial services industry? And, you know, 9 times out of 10, there's so much difference between those industries. or businesses, that it usually doesn't work, right? So that's kind of the first thing that I look for, and that's the first thing that kind of pops up. But I suppose on top of that, and one of the things that really gets me about CVs is sometimes I'll open a profile and their tech stack overview and their profile, not their project, looks amazing, right? And they've got every tech on there, every programming language, TensorFlow, PyTorch, all different use cases. And then I actually look at the projects that they've been working on, and those two things are not linked. So it's kind of just like buzzword bingo on their CV, but the actual projects and the things they've actually done don't link to that, right? So for me, I think the second point is and this is really obvious, but your projects are related to the tech stack you've got there, and you'll be surprised about how many profiles don't do that. And your CV should be a representation of what you're doing, right? So if you claim to know X, Y, and Z, you should be able to back that up with specific examples of projects and be able to illustrate that in your CV.
Just to clarify, like
sure.
Projects, you mean not necessarily projects on GitHub, but projects again could be on CV, on portfolio, just a list of projects that this person has done previously, right?
Yeah. So I think it's both, really. It depends on what level you're coming in. Again, and this is the difficult thing. It's all very singular. That might be the case for one person, but there might be a more junior candidate trying to make a break into the industry. And then I would want to see what GitHub projects or what, personal projects you've worked on, which would again illustrate that technical experience and that understanding, right? But if you're more senior, if you tell me that you know X, you've got to show me where you've done that or how you've used that, right? So yeah, that's the second main point, is that I would want to see the projects that you've worked on are a representation of the tech stack that you think you say you understand. And then lastly, I think this breaks down into kind of three key categories, which is tenure, common themes, and growth. So what I mean by that is, I would want, if I look at a CV, I would want to see that someone had a good amount of time in the businesses that they'd worked in, and not jumped from place to place for an extra 5K or, just a new change of scenery, right? So as a headhunter, I think, right, are you someone who's going to, carefully choose the right industry and the right opportunity for you, but are you actually going to stay there? And then secondly, the common themes and growth. It's like, well, have you got a purpose in terms of your career right now, right? So have you done a huge amount of broad projects and you kind of go from one data science job to another? Or have you got, right, I'm really interested in this sector or industry or type of client, and that's where I'm really going? And growth, obviously, I would want to see someone progress in their career. So if you're a data scientist now, but you was a data scientist 5 years ago, my first question would be, why haven't you progressed? And, run me through that, right? And I know there's going to be some examples of people that just want to do that one particular position. But, I would want to understand those kind of points. So, yeah, that's what I typically look for. Sorry if I just threw loads of information out there.
Maybe let me try to summarize what you said, and then you'll tell me if I got it right. So first you look at the design, right? So just, it shouldn't be completely, bad. Like, I don't know how to say, but like tasteless, maybe. Like, just a bit of creativity will not hurt your CV, right? Just to, at least get your attention, right? But then you look at the industry where the candidate works. So it should be ideally as close as possible to the industry of your client. Also, it also involves cultural fit in a way that it's if your position is in a startup, it should also be like ideal candidate who have experience working at a startup, right? Right. And then you also look at projects, and then what is important in projects is that they are linked to actual skills. So it's not just a bunch of buzzwords on CV, but actually for each project, it's clear for you how these skills were used, right? And then finally, you look at people who don't jump too often from position to position. So who have some sort of focus, maybe, if I can put it this way. And yeah, and also you look at career progression, right?
Yeah.
Did I get it right?
Yeah, I think with just on the use cases, for me, you can work on recommendation systems in Spotify or Get Your Guide, and then also work on, recommendation systems in Zalando, right? So it's not just all. It's about finding balance between understanding those kinds of industries, and understanding the use cases that those industries would typically work on, right? Because I think the thing with data science is it's not necessarily, it's about understanding the business problem to be able to apply your skills to solve those problems, right? So for me, it's kind of a combination between thinking, right, do you know the industry and do you know the use cases, or do you know the industry but might have slightly different use cases, or do you know the use cases but might have a slightly different industry? So it's one of those things where you've got to kind of look at it and balance and think, right, well, what do they know and where can we kind of make this work? So it's really different from candidate to candidate, and again, it's super subjective and very singular, but that's typically the stuff that I'll look for.
But from what I understood, the important thing is to have it, to make it clear on CV what are the use cases you worked on. So then when the recruiter like you looks at the CV, it's immediately clear for them, okay, these are things that the candidate worked on, right? These are the projects,
Yeah.
the use cases, these are the industries. And then for you, it's immediately clear, okay, this candidate is a good fit, or maybe this candidate not necessarily a good fit, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, and then like I also wanted to ask you about the design, because usually like data scientists are not designers, right? And we yeah, we don't spend a lot of time using tools like Canva or Adobe Illustrator or whatever to come up with an excellent CV like designers would do. And I wanted to ask you, like,
Yeah.
what is it that you look in design, like how a good design looks like to you? Just curious.
Yeah. So it doesn't have, like, I'm not saying that this has to be like super colorful and that's not necessarily what I'm saying from a design perspective, but what I am saying is it needs to be clear, and so it just needs to look professionally clear, right? I know it's not a very good way to describe it, but some CVs are open and it's clearly just been, there's been no thought in terms of kind of how to put that together, and it's kind of just this is kind of everything I've done, let's just throw that onto a Word document, and then just let's send that out. So design again is subjective, right? But I also think it's very dependent on what kind of business you're applying for. So if you're applying to an Allianz or a Munich Re, would I advise having a really colourful, cool, techie CV? No. I'd say you need to make that look professional to, kind of capture the audience that you're talking to, right? Because again, the moment someone opens your CV, they are judging who you are. So if you don't fit the mold of the type of business that you're applying to, be that a startup or financial services or whatever, then that first couple of seconds, it needs to hit home with that individual business, right? And they need to think, I think it's more of a kind of psychological thing, but they need to think, right, that's the type of view of us as a business. So I think the question that you need to ask yourself is, what are you trying to portray to the people that you're trying to network with? Is it ultra professional, banking, insurance, corporate, which is fine. Like, if you wanted to go that route, then double down there. Or do you want to work with, cool techie startups? What's their kind of vibe in that kind of community, right? And you need to replicate that with the profiles that you've built. I hope that gives you a little bit more color around the design part.
Yeah, and also, as I understood, it's not only about like how you choose colors, but also how you structure it. So it's not just a brain dump, right? You just sit down and list all the skills, like all the technologies you ever worked with, all the places of work, like instead of just giving a brain dump, just structure it, right? So it makes it easy for the receiver of this information to actually go through this and understand this information, right? So it's not about
Yeah.
colors, it's not about like these beautiful shapes, but more like
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
We have a question. We have a question from Bujar. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. How often is too often changing jobs? What is the currently at the average time that the person stays in a job? Like, what would be a red flag for you?
Yeah, I think anything under a year is a red flag. A year to 2 years in most companies is kind of about average now. Anything over a 2 year period, I'm like, that's a good amount of time to spend in a company right now. But yeah, if it's, and it's not necessarily about one thing that happens, right? So, if everyone can make mistakes. I've done it in the past, and you join a business, it doesn't turn out to be what you think it is. Like, that's totally fine, right? But if that's kind of a common theme across the experience you've got, so if you've had 12 roles in 12 years and they've been on average a year each, for me, that says to me that you don't like sticking in one place. So yeah, as a headhunter, that is concerning because the companies that we work with, they want us to find people that are going to stay in the business, progress, all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'd say it's more about the consistency of how often you're moving. So if you had a really solid career and it was 2-3 years in most of the positions you had, but one position was your last position was 3 or 4 months, didn't work out, totally cool. But if it's that replicated across every role you've worked in, that's a concern.
Okay, understand. Okay, and there is also a question from Kanika. You mentioned that you look for a background in a specific industry, but what about freshers who don't have any background? Like, do you also work with junior candidates? And in this case, yeah, if you do, like, what do you look for in junior candidates?
So I think we was going to cover this a little bit later, but I'll dive into this now. So I do work a bit with more junior candidates. I wouldn't say that's my key focus, but I do that. And I think the key for me when I look for junior candidates, and I think any candidate actually, is having purpose in their search. I know it sounds a bit fluffy, but there are lots of candidates. But there are lots of candidates that I open their CV and it literally looks super generic, like generic tech stack, generic kind of overview, generic background, apply for anything, not really any direction in terms of where they want to take their career. So my thoughts my thoughts on this is, if you're trying to break into the industry, I think it's really difficult to go broad. I think where you'll be most successful is if you pick something, or if you pick an industry, or if you pick an area of data science and machine learning that you're really passionate about and really doubling down on that. So taking autonomous drive as an example, if you're passionate about that industry, then do things to illustrate that, which would bolster your profile and elevate you above people that are kind of generic. So as a human being, I try and live by aim small, miss small. So for me, I'd pick an industry and think, right, what can I do alongside the technical skills and the experience I'm trying to gain? What can I do outside of all of that? That if someone opened my profile, even though you're junior or you're a fresher or whatever, they look at you and think, you're probably not there in seniority, but you definitely want to do this. Like, this is 100% what you want to do. So I'd start going to tech meetups, I'd start going to conferences, I'd start learning about the industry and start learning about it from a commercial and business perspective. And all of this sort of stuff I would highlight in your profile. So as someone opens it, it's not just, okay, cool, they know TensorFlow and they know Python and they know X, which pretty much everyone knows. You know, you're setting yourself aside from the generic do anything kind of candidate. So for me, if you're a junior and you're trying to break into an industry, find one or two industries that you're really, really interested in and bolster your profile around that industry, because that will give you a better chance of entering that industry.
Yeah, so like you said, one of the first things you look at is the match between, like industry match between what your client is looking for and what is on the CV. And then for you, if it's clear what the focus of a candidate is, even if it's a junior candidate, then it's already the candidate already stands out from the rest of the candidates, right? Because it's clear that this person really wants to work in this area, and which also happens to be the area of your client, right?
Exactly. And, you know, for me, I think that when people are clearly passionate about something, maybe I look at this from too much of a human perspective, but I'm like, I want to try and help that person because they clearly want to do this. So, you know, for me, ask any of the clients that I've worked with, there'll always be an instance where I'll be like, hey, Alexei, I know this guy's too junior, but trust me on this, like, this is the type of person that in a year or 2 years' time will be an absolute superstar. And I don't think you get as many opportunities to do that as a candidate, or get those opportunities for someone to represent you in that kind of way, if you approach the market in like a really generic way and just like, hey, we'll do anything, like spray and pray. You know, for me, you want people to believe in you. I know that, again, that is getting super cheesy and stuff, but you know, when I see someone that clearly wants to do something, you know, I'll go out of my way to try and help that person and think, right, this person in a couple of years will be amazing. So, you know, I'll try and my hardest to help that person do that. So yeah, even at a junior level, you know, I'll still look for, okay, cool, what are you doing outside of your masters, or what are you doing outside of your internships that promote your profile in the industry or focus that you want to move into.
Yeah, so I guess if you really want to tailor your application to a specific position, one thing you can do is, of course, you need to show that you really focus on this industry, you really like this industry. But is there anything else candidates can do to show that they're really interested in this position? Like, let's say somebody is applying to a position online, and they want to really make sure they get this position. What are the things they can do for that?
So I'll give you my PC way, the right way to do it, and then I would give you what I would personally do. As,
okay.
You know, so most like companies will probably hate me saying stuff like this as well. So we'll cover that off in a bit. But so number one, I think that, and again, I know this is simple, and probably some of your listeners are rolling your eyes now, but you absolutely need to read the job descriptions before you apply, because it's not. And I know that sounds really stupid and super simple, but when you're tailoring your application, you're not doing that to understand what they're looking for. You're doing that so you can apply your skills and outline how you can help them solve those problems, right? So as a candidate or an applicant, you absolutely need to do some research before you apply to a business, because again, if you're blanket sending out your application, and bearing in mind, right, so like what we said earlier, there are companies out there that are getting 1,300, maybe more applications for a role. So you've got two options, right? You can either throw your hat into that and hopefully something happens, or you can think, right, as a business, what are the problems that this company is facing right now and what are their challenges? How does my experience and what I've done as an individual, how does that link to that? and how can you make the distinction between those two things? So how do you start? How you need to outline point B, outline point A. You think, right, this is how those two things link. So again, this links back to what I was saying. It's not just about the industry or the use cases specifically. It's about how can you link those two things together. So first up, I would definitely outline or try as best as you can to outline the challenges and problems that individual company is facing. Secondly, I would put together an email, LinkedIn, however you want to do it, but I would make it ultra targeted, and I would make it super relevant for the reader. So when that message lands with someone, you want to take as much of the work off of their plate as possible. So instead of them having to click into your CV and then trying to find that information, I would be like, right, this is challenge A that you guys are facing right now. This is what I've done that would solve that challenge. Challenge B, this is what I've done. Challenge C, this is what I've done. Because I think the more you can tailor that and make it very, very specific for that application, the more someone is going to open that and think, shit, this guy has really, or the girl has really taken the time to A, do their research, and B, it looks like they know what we're trying to do here, right? So for me, I'd put together those things. I'd make it ultra, ultra targeted. But thirdly, I would align your CV to highlight these great problems for you. You open their CV and it doesn't reflect what you're saying in that email. So you need to adjust your CV based on the conversations that you're trying to have with, the clients that you're approaching, because again, that's a representation of your skills and what you've done in the past, right? And if it doesn't link to that, they're going to say, okay, cool, you sent a great email, but actually what are you doing in your, again, what are you actually doing in your experience, right? And then lastly, I think you need to research and approach the right people in the business. So yeah, again, companies will hate me for saying this, but I personally wouldn't. I'm not going to say this actually, but I wouldn't. I'm not a big fan of throwing my hat into 1,000 applications. That's not personally the way that I would do it. If I was going to try and approach a business, I would find the right people that I wanted to talk to, and I would approach them directly. But I wouldn't do it in a blanket way that's just going to piss people off, because people know if you've taken the time to approach them with something valuable that's targeted. If you do that, you'll have a really great impression with that business. If you do it in a blanket way, a lot of the time it will be disregarded and it will just piss people off. So my thing is, if you're going to approach people directly, which I would, firstly, I would do it in a really targeted way that person will know that you've taken the time to do that. Now, is everyone going to respond to you? Probably not. But the people that do and the people that appreciate that sort of stuff they'll be like a sponsor for you into the business. So to give you an example, a friend of mine recently, he moved out of recruitment and into a software sales job. And the way that he approached it was he filmed himself giving an overview of him as a human being and what he does and his experience and the value that he can bring to organizations. But he reached out to sales directors within big software vendors like Domo, who else did he reach out to? Salesforce, companies like that, right? And he was like, look, this is what I do and this is why I'd love to work for you guys. But it was all super targeted. So as the hiring managers opened all of these video CVs, they were like, this guy's taking the time to do this. And he had multiple companies come back to him and say, we've not seen anything like that before. Thank you for taking the time to do that. And he landed one of the jobs with one of those companies. And now that company uses his approach with the sales tactics that they have. So anyway, it's just an example that if you're going to approach people directly and do that, make it targeted. So when it lands with them, they can see you've put the time and effort into doing that.
Yeah, but Yeah, I guess like if you want to, like you really need to focus on a few positions because there is no way you can do that for 10 or 20 positions. That's just too much time, right? So you really need to pick an area where you want to focus and then find the
Mm,
companies that you really want to work with and then
mm,
approach everyone individually, right?
yeah,
And if
but
you, I want, sorry.
this leans back onto what I was saying about having purpose in your
Mhm.
career, right? So if you can segment your purpose and say, let's take autonomous driving, for example, it's quite easy to break down all of the autonomous driving businesses in Germany, for example. So, you know, if you look at machine learning engineer, yeah, like how are you going to approach that? There's what, like 4,000 jobs in Germany right now. So yeah, where do you start with that? But if you say, right, I'm looking for AD startups or something in the autonomous drive space or on the secondary kind of level in Berlin, that's an easily digestible
Mhm.
way that you can say, right, this is what I'm going to try and do. And this is the industry and the kind of the landscape that I'm trying to do it in. So yeah, everything needs to kind of feed into one another, I think.
Yeah, so we have a couple of questions on sliders. I'll, uh, yeah, I think we should, maybe you like this. So if somebody wants to change their career from academy to industry, what can they do? Like, how can they stand out? Like, how they can compete with people who already have experience in industry? Because usually, like when you're hiring somebody, you already want to have somebody with experience, right? How can these people who just maybe graduated, got a PhD or worked in academia, how can they make this transition? Do you have any recommendation
Mm,
of them?
yeah, that is a really good question and something that people struggle with constantly. Just for clarity, is this person talking about if they're coming from like a research role in one of the universities, or are
I
they
think
talking
so,
about
yes.
from? Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge that I find is that companies push back, or the clients that I work with, they push back on the fact that the people that are coming from those research and academic positions don't have the product mindset that they need to be able to create, to be able to do the positions. So what I mean by that is, you know, I'm speaking pretty broadly here and like, you know, tarring everyone with the same brush, but, you know, a lot of the time they have a research for research mindset. And they don't have that commercial business mindset, and not from a business strategic perspective, but they don't have that, right, we need to make shit happen and we need to actually do something rather than just research and we have all the time in the world. And you know, it kind of comes down to that different mindset shift of moving out of, cool, we're doing academic research now and we really want to find like cool answers and we really want to do it for the research sake, which is also extremely valuable. V, actually we're building this product to sell, because any business that isn't, that's not research and you know, academia, they're there to make money, right?
Mhm.
And it's the difference in mindset between academic research to, okay, cool, we're here to actually build a product to sell to people. So I think the mindset thing is the biggest change, or the biggest change you would need to make, and would help you transition out of that. So that internal narrative that you have about what you do, you need to switch that from that piece to that piece. I can definitely help you with that. So if you want to connect to me on LinkedIn, I can talk you through that in more detail. But secondly, I think it's about, it's really difficult because if you've got an opportunity to do something internally at an academic institute to productionize something, do it, because then you've got experience in actually productizing something. And you know, there are people that I've worked with in the past that have done that in, you know, kind of small terms, so it's not just all research. But on top of that, I would start looking at personal projects about what you can do in the background to add on top of the research you're doing. I would think, right, well, what am I researching? How can I apply that in a real world scenario and do a personal project on it? Because then again, that shows me commitment, right? Because they're saying, look, you know, I know that I hadn't had the production level experience, that this is what I've done to counteract that. And then again, when you send your profile to someone, you need to highlight the connection between those two things. So yeah, for me, I think the easiest thing you would do is understand the mindset of the businesses that you're trying to apply for. And then secondly, start working on personal projects that would complement the research work that you've been doing.
Or find a project at university. Yeah, I know that some universities have collaboration with companies, with the industry, and I think it's a really good idea to try to get in these projects and learn from that. Then we also have a question. Are there people that are really passionate about positions in advertisement or marketing? It's not all. Why does wanting a job for money make you a bad fit? It's actually two questions, I guess.
Yeah.
In one.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe. Maybe. I'm just, my perspective. So the people that I've seen really accelerate their career quickly and to high levels are the people that have real key focus. There's nothing wrong with taking a job and focusing purely on the financial part. If that's your focus and that's your goal, go for it. Go and work for a McKinsey and work 90 hours a week, and that's where you're going to earn the most amount of money, right? So I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with doing the other side of that and just taking the job for financial benefits. But it's all subjective, right? And it depends on you as a human. So if you find something, and again, for me, I'm looking at the people that I've seen be really successful and the profiles that I see and think, shit, they're brilliant. It's because they've got key focus. And even if that is marketing, there are going to be companies out there that will be like, great, that's exactly what we need. So it's not necessarily all about the industry per se. It's about having your focus in terms of what you want to do. If that's financial, that's financial. If it's right, I want to progress my career. In my experience, the quickest way to do that is by having a focus, be that industry or area. Okay. Does that answer your question? I hope it did.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question for that. What is your opinion on people who you reach out and the first thing they ask is, hey, but what is the salary? Like, is it for you a red flag or like it's a normal thing? How do you react to that?
You know what? I think I totally empathize with everyone that works in this industry, because they're contacted every single day by hundreds of recruiters with shit roles, paying shit salaries. For me, I think it's fair play. Like, do you want to waste your time having a conversation with someone if, number one, they can't pay the money that you need? So for me, it's never a red flag, because I appreciate how frustrating it must be from their side. If the sole focus on their new job search is financial, that is a bit of a red flag to me personally, because you're going to go where the money is, and if another company is paying more money than the clients that I'm working with, that's a big concern. But yeah, there's a lot of debate in the recruitment world about how much information you should share in the first approach, and I'm on the side of I'll give you the job specs, the client names, salaries, whatever you need to be able to make an accurate decision on, should we have a conversation? I'll give you that information, because I don't think you can tout being an honest business if someone asks you a question and you don't answer it. So for me, it's not a red flag. I think that stems from a lot of wasted time by shit recruiters.
It's actually like 90% of recruiters, in my experience, when I ask them, hey, what is the company? They don't answer. So this is like what you're doing is clearly different from the rest of external recruiters. So I really appreciate that.
I think the only reason why they do that as well, Alexi, is because and again, this just highlights how much of a bad industry recruitment can be sometimes, is that people will put together fake profiles of fake candidates to extract leads from recruiters that will share that information, right? But in my career, I don't think I've ever, not once, had a candidate, and they also say that, oh, well, you could apply directly for the business and cut me out of it, kind of thing. In my career, I've never ever had that. So that's never ever been a situation that I've experienced.
Okay, yeah. So we also have a question from Gisela about CV styles. She grew up in Germany and live in the US, and she sees that the styles of CVs are different. In your experience, like how different like CVs that you're getting, like are they vastly different, or maybe they most of them follow the same structure?
Yeah, Germany's got a very distinct style in terms of the kind of classical profile. Yeah, it's pretty. There's a lot of that. I think the ones that really stand out for me are the ones that are unique, and they take the time to think, oh, actually, well, this is a representation of me. So, yeah, and there have definitely been times in the past where someone says, oh, what do you think about this? Because this is how you should do it in Germany. And I always think, well, like, why?
Okay.
Like, who are the people that are managing the kind of German CV format? Like, you know, I think personally it should be a personal representation of you, so it should be a personal thing. So yeah, there is, but I would definitely go against it.
Yeah. And also I have a related question, because in the States, usually they focus, like they really, I think it's every blog post that you read, they say your CV has to be 1 page long, not more.
Yeah.
Like 1 page for 10 years of experience. But in Germany, I've seen like CVs that are 5 pages long, 6 pages long. And yeah, sometimes I saw a CV recently 10 pages long with, you know, like it felt like a novel. So what is your opinion? Like how long a CV should be?
Yeah. So I think like the ideal length is 2 pages. I honestly don't think you can get enough content on 1 page to make it sing. I think 3 pages is like borderline too much, but I think 2 pages is kind of like ideal, because that's kind of the balance between having enough content, deep content that will give me context to what you do, but also limit you in terms of war and peace, right? So I think 2 pages is kind of the ideal number. But, you know, again, I think if you can keep someone's attention for 5 pages, then awesome. But 9 times out of 10, there's a lot of content in there that's kind of irrelevant, and it's just kind of like overload, right? So yeah, for me, I would say that 2 pages are like the dream.
Yeah, so it keeps you focused, but also doesn't let you, you know, just brain dump. And
yeah.
Do you have 5-10 more minutes? We have
got
like
all the time in the world for you, Alexi.
yeah,
Man, it's all good.
We have 4 more questions. So Nishant is asking, is it okay to write a job title in his CV that more closely represent the work they are doing, instead of, you know, putting the official title? Because I know from my experience, I know some companies put manager in the role just for the sake. I don't know why they do this, but often like I don't know, analytics manager, and that person doesn't manage any other people, right? Is it okay if these people, let's say, instead of putting analytics manager, put data analyst in their CV? Like it's not the official title that they have, but maybe it follows the industry trends rather than like a particular job grid, job description in a company.
Yeah. Personally, I think it is, but as long as you're not lying about what you're doing. So, for example, is it okay to write software engineer if your job title is software developer? You know, I think that that's okay. Is it okay to write lead software engineer if you're like a junior? You know, that's not okay, right? Okay. So I think it's okay to align it, but as long as it is not so far past reality that it could be considered a lie. So, you know, if you are doing those things, but your job title is slightly off and you're applying for a data science position, and, you know, your job title is, I don't know, something that isn't that, then, you know, for me, it's okay to slightly adjust it to, you know, hit the mark. But yeah, not at the extent of lying. I don't think you should ever lie on a CV, but I do think you should align on your CV.
If previous commercial experience in a field loosely related to data science or machine learning, is it advantage or drawback? Asking as someone who wants to switch from web developer to machine learning.
You could probably give a better answer to that, but I think I'm not too knowledgeable in the kind of like web dev to data science field. I think anyone who comes from a programming background in general, if you move into data science, I do think that that gives you a good platform to be able to learn programming and engineering as a whole. So I think that there's definitely crossover, and if you've got more appreciation for the wider parts of the organization that you would have interaction with, so like UX and UI and that kind of piece, then yeah, like it, you know, it's never going to do any harm. Is it going to be directly relatable? So I think what you're asking is, you know, would I look at someone who's come from that background and think, wow, that's great? I wouldn't, but what I would think is that's good because you've probably got a good foundation to learn from. So as long as the you know, what you do on top of that is a good you know, from an educational standpoint, you've taken the time to kind of learn you know, the other areas in depth, you know, then I think it is always a good thing. But I don't think that that will be the thing that will get you the job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would add that it's not neither advantage or drawback. It's it's a good thing, but not like you said, it's not the thing that will get you a job, right? Then Gunjan, I hope, sorry if I pronounce it incorrectly, is asking, is it okay to tell recruiters about other companies you're currently interviewing with?
Depends on the recruiter. You know, yeah, it depends on the recruiter. So for example, like, you know, the reason why a lot of companies do that is because they want to extract information from you to be able to gauge, you know, where you're at with things. So for example, if you're interviewing with me at a company that I work with, and your other companies are Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Netflix, and you're interviewing with my company who's got 3 people in Hamburg, what's the likelihood of you taking that position is probably quite low, right? But on the other side of that, the old school way of recruitment is that if you tell me when you're interviewing, I'll, not me personally, but I would try and go and get those jobs as clients. So again, I think it very much depends on the recruiter that you're working with and how much you trust that individual. If you think he wouldn't do that to me, or she wouldn't do that to me, then yeah, if you've got a good relationship there, then like there's no reason why you shouldn't, if you know, because then you can kind of discuss everything and you can kind of set the landscape about where you're at with things. And I always believe that being open and transparent is the best thing you can do. If it's a new recruiter off the block who's just called you and said, hey, like, yeah, I've got this job, where else are you interviewing? Definitely not. The whole recruitment industry is like shaking their head at me now and thinking I'm a complete dick. I don't care.
Yeah, I never thought about this, that there are multiple reasons for asking this question, and also one of the reasons is actually just going and approaching the company to offer their services. It's interesting. How impactful asking salary is in the application process? Like, is it like if somebody is asking a too low number, does it reflect lack of confidence or um, lack of confidence in a skill set, or maybe just shows that this candidate doesn't know maybe market well enough? Or what do you think about this? Like if somebody is asking or a number too low, too high? Uh,
Too low. I've never, as a person, if someone says to me that if someone gave me a salary and it's 10k under kind of what I would classify as market rate, I'd never put that down to confidence, or I've never said, oh, they must be slightly not confident in their abilities or something like that. My first go-to is, oh, they're underpaid. So I don't think it's necessarily bad going too low. I don't think that's going to have a negative reaction to your job search if you're under the market value. I guess it depends on how you frame that, right? Like if you say, oh yeah, well I'm only worth this, then yeah, that's going to come down to a confidence issue. If it just turns out that you work for a business that has maybe helped, like ask you to relocate into Germany, and now you're paid less than what people in the country would be paid, or if you've joined the grad scheme and you've worked your way up, there are going to be lots of different situations for that. I don't think, I'm kind of in two minds about the salary thing right now, because originally in my recruitment career, I always wanted to know what people were on. Now I'm a little bit more mature, and I don't typically, I talk about it, but I'm not like, right, what do you earn right now? If they want to share that information with me, cool. But for me, I just want to understand what they want from their next role and their next salary. So I don't think it would have a negative connotation. I do think it's a negative thing if you ask for too much, because then my instant go-to is, oh, you're just trying to get like tons more money, and that's the kind of main focus, right? I think in the data science and machine learning and AI community right now, there are lots of opportunity for good people to earn a lot of money. But if I see someone who's got 6 months experience say, yeah, cool, I want 120k, then I'm like, hey, cool, but you're not quite there yet. So I think it's more negative from the other side. Lower is, especially if you're still learning the industry and you're still learning the role, I don't think it's a negative thing at all.
Okay, thanks. So we don't have any more questions, and we are a bit over time. So just maybe to summarize our conversation, what is, in your opinion, what makes some candidates really stand out?
So I thought about this for a while, and the two things that, for me, I think there's one thing that really makes candidates stand out to me, and it's understanding their purpose and doubling down on that. And I think once you do that, everything else becomes easy. But I think if you don't have that, and you're dictated by the market, and it's just, I'm going to get a job here and then hopefully I'll get one here, and it's kind of just a hope that something happens. The candidates that really stand out, or looking back at the people that I've worked with, the candidates that I'm like, they are mustard, are the ones that have worked in pretty much one industry, but they've just nailed it. And it's kind of just like inch wide, mile deep, and that's their focus. So yeah, in terms of what I think makes candidates really stand out is having purpose and really working towards that. And that's that.
Yeah, thanks for coming to this event, for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Thanks, Luke.
No worries. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So how did it feel being on the other side, like being a guest in a podcast?
Do you know what I really liked? I love the questions. I think it's really good. It's I'll be honest, it was a bit nervous because this is the first time of me being a guest, right? So definitely nerve-wracking, because you want to say stuff that people get value from, right? And you don't want to come here and say, oh, well, make sure that your font is size 10 or some shit like that. You want to make sure that people can take this sort of stuff and then actually do it, and it actually has impact. So yeah, I hope. How do you feel like it went? Was that good or not so good?
It was great. Yeah, I'm still recording, by the way. It's okay.
That's cool. Mate, vulnerability is a good skill to have, I think.
Yep. Well, I guess that's all for today. So thanks a lot for coming again. Yeah, so I'll share the links on YouTube and everywhere soon. So yeah.
Great, awesome. If there's anyone listening who want to send me direct messages, please connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to look over your CV, give you any advice that you need, and help you direct what you're trying to do. So yeah, if anyone needs anything, then please connect to me on LinkedIn.
I'll make sure to put your LinkedIn account, a link to your LinkedIn account in the show notes.
Okay. Awesome.
Yes.
Luke, check out the chat. People love you.
Oh yeah.
The chat window. People love you. So you're
Oh,
going to get a lot of LinkedIn requests. I'm back on mute. I'm back on mute.
Awesome. Good. All right. Well, look, yeah, I guess that's it, man. So yeah, if you need anything from me, let me know, Alexei.
Yes. Goodbye.
Awesome, man. Speak to you soon.
Bye.